Hi, everyone, and welcome to Workforce Solutions Capital Areas Career Awareness Webinar Series. You are joining us for a unique series of videos interviews with professionals in in-demand industries to learn more about career pathways and educational opportunities in Central Texas. Today, we are covering the manufacturing industry, so we will be directing questions for Liz Campo, the Design Transfer and Process Engineer with Illuminex. Illuminex is a local manufacturer, and their core mission is to empower labs to obtain reliable, timely, and actionable answers, ultimately advancing health. They offer a wide range of solutions applicable in diverse markets, including clinical diagnostics, pharmaceutical drug discovery, biomedical research, genomic and proteomic research, and food safety. Also on the call is a teacher from Round Rock ISD, Mr. Bailey Holsey. Bailey will be asking questions for Liz today, and together we will explore Liz's career journey and careers and education related to the manufacturing industry. Bailey, I'm going to pass it on to you and Liz, and you can go and fire away.
Okay, cool. So Liz, can you tell us about yourself and what you do at Illuminex?
Yeah, sure. So my background is in mechanical engineering, and I am originally from the Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area. I went to Penn State, and after Penn State got a job here in Austin and switched companies to Luminex about 5 years ago. And so at Luminex, I am currently in the instrument manufacturing group, and like Natalie had said, doing design transfer. And so I was previously in the R&D group working on the design of the instruments that we're now manufacturing.
Okay, so you used to design them and now you do instrument, what is it again?
So the title is called Design Transfer Process Engineering, which is kind of a mouthful, but basically our group is responsible for the instruments as opposed to the test kits. So we're working on the actual equipment, the machinery. And so whether right now I'm working with R&D to transfer instruments that they might be working on, but then we are also supporting on-market instruments as well. And so it's sort of a sustaining role, but then also a design transfer role.
Okay. And what are the particular instruments that you guys are working with? Is it one line of products?
We have multiple instruments in different areas, with two of the not distinct differences, but two differences right now that are IVD, which is in vitro diagnostics, or research use only, which might be used in like an academic lab. But they're all, like Natalie had said, they're used for all kinds of different applications depending on the platform. Right now we have two instruments that got emergency use authorization for IVD COVID testing. So that's something that's like very, topical, especially right now, very in high demand. But in general, our instruments can be used for all kinds of things depending on what the lab or the hospital would need.
That's great. Are they particularly electronic instruments? So you would transduce the signal of whatever you're testing for into an electric signal, right?
Yeah, so there are multiple components to all the instruments. Definitely having an understanding of like electronics is important. I think what you might be getting at is like maybe optic signals, and that's for sure something that happens in our systems, is that we're taking an optic measurement and then having to read that out with electrical and software to ultimately provide the diagnosis or whatever it is that they're looking for. So it's a combination of electromechanical, optics, and then obviously software is very important as well. Definitely a multifaceted approach here. Even though my background's in mechanical, I can't purely just jump in with that piece.
Right.
And then I'm working with biologists and chemists too. So it really is an interdisciplinary job, like most engineering and manufacturing jobs would probably be.
I was about to say, you would probably guess that most of the industry is not singularly focused, where if you study mechanical engineering, that's all you're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you using a lot of mechanical engineering in your particular position? Or would you
Yes.
say a lot of different fields?
Yeah, I definitely have, especially in this role, being in biotech, there's definitely use of many of the classes, even the materials classes that I worked on, looking at, you know, if we're moving towards a different valve design, or we want to machine something out of a different type of material, we're always looking to see kind of, oh, you know, what kind of material properties those have. But for sure, yeah, I'm using design. Something that's common is GD&T, it's called, where it's basically like tolerances. And so when we're working with our vendors, we want to make sure that we're giving them a good set of drawings that they can make the parts with, and that it's going to be consistent, but also not something that's like, you know, impossible that they're going to spend a week on. So there's definitely a balance. And then just in general, just from a processes standpoint, I know I took an industrial engineering course, and that's huge in the manufacturing environment, kind of taking those steps. So yeah, I am fortunate that I am using a lot of what I learned in college and applying that. Yeah, and then if if anything, sometimes it's familiar, and then I have to look it back up again. But yeah.
And would you say that you work with people with lots of different backgrounds too? You know, if you already mentioned you're working with biologists and those kinds of people too, and so you think that you with your mechanical background, and then some other people with electrical background, and then, you know, the optics, and then the systems, and then the project management and the biologists, all those different people are coming together to make the whole thing work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and then that's from a technical standpoint, and then there is the science side of it, where you know, even engineers and scientists can sometimes have a different language in how we explain things. And so there's some really great partnerships that I've formed with people who can kind of just explain the chemistry of things, because I'm looking at it from like a purely, you know, design standpoint. And just for my own personal knowledge, it's interesting. But not just from technical degrees. Of course, in any company, you're going to have to work with, you know, non-technical groups that are supporting. You know, our supply groups are super helpful, and then also just in general, you know, the marketing groups and things like that. And then within the manufacturing floor, working with the technical staff, like the technicians and assemblers who are putting the parts together. And that's kind of like a huge piece of what I'm working on now, is making sure that our manufacturing instructions are clear, getting feedback from them in terms of how things could be done more streamlined, more ergonomic. I mean, they're really the ones who, in my opinion, have so much information that they can share with us. And so it's, you know, not just coming in here with like, you know, 2 engineering degrees and being like, oh, I know like everything. Because it's like, no, these people have, you know, who are working in so closely to these instruments really have a great knowledge of it. And so they can kind of share that with us.
Do you have manufacturing facilities on site?
Yes, yes. So we do build our instruments here in Austin, and then there is also some of the consumables, which is like the test kits. Some of them are made here as well, and then also the chemistry side as well. We do have some of that we do here in Austin. So the majority of our manufacturing is in Austin. All of the instrument manufacturing is here, yeah. Well, except for a small group in Seattle, yeah.
Seattle, okay. So if you were to work on R&D and design let's say a mechanical product, if you were to design it in a CAD modeling software and then give the manufacturing group your drawings, your engineering drawings, would you be able to walk, you know, across the street or whatever to go see how it's manufactured?
Oh, I see your question. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. When I say our manufacturing is in Austin, I mean like the manufacturing of our instruments. We do have a machine shop in R&D for doing like small prototype quantities if we wanted to get parts actually physically made from a design standpoint. And then sorry, I have someone calling me. And so then if we want to scale that up for manufacturing, we would go to an outside vendor, because we just have so many parts, and the bread and butter of what we do is really focusing on the instruments and then the reagents or the chemistry.
Okay.
So we go to outside machine shops that can scale that up to a larger quantity.
It seems like, I don't know a whole lot about the industry, but it seems like that's typically what happens for the mechanical side, the machine side. But then you're talking about the chemistry, the chemical assays, and the optics, the instruments. Those are manufactured in-house.
So we procure the parts for the rest of the system. All the parts are procured and then they arrive here, and then usually in some states they might have like sub-assemblies that we contract out and have some vendors do small steps, but then the majority of the assembly is in Austin. And like I said, we do have other locations where they're working on, I think I said Seattle, we also have some in the Chicago, but there's a few sites for Luminex now. But anyway, so when we're making the instrument, the majority of the instrument is made in Austin. And likewise for the assays, they have the, you know, the word I'm thinking is ingredients, and it's because I'm thinking of it from like a non-science standpoint, but like, you know, as they're making the chemicals that are coming in to make their assays are coming in, and then they're, you know, doing that part themselves. And they're
cool. So it seems like a huge network of suppliers and
oh yes,
all of it comes together. And the person or the group that would organize all of that network, is that project management?
So there is a supply, I think they would be under sourcing. Yeah. And so they're like our supplier management. And then we work with that team. There's a few like sourcing agents or specialists, and then we work with them. Like maybe there's one person who does like optics vendors. And so if we're having some questions that are coming up, or you know, I also work very closely with the like fluidics component, but then there's another person who handles like all electrical cabling, PCBAs, things like that, power supplies. So they're kind of like commodities, like in specific people. And so, yeah, so, you know, if we have a finding, we can just talk to them, and then they would be the one to kind of pull in the vendor, or vice versa. If the vendor's like, hey, we've been making this part for X number of years, it's time to switch over to this new and improved part. It goes through the opposite way.
Cool. I think that sounds really exciting and really fun to organize. That's kind of my piece. I love seeing how all of the different pieces come together, because I think a lot of times in high school, at least, students just kind of work on smaller scale projects, and they're able to, you know, go to the storage, you know, room or section of the classroom and like get all of the parts together and then just start making stuff. So to know that a large scale project like this takes a huge village, I think will be very valuable to them.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Please describe a typical workday and or your main responsibilities.
Yeah, so I'm laughing because our typical workday is not typical, which is nice because it changes. You know, it's very project based, but also we might walk in one day and then be like, oh, we got a high demand going on over here, and these parts came in and maybe they're not meeting spec, or you know, suddenly these instruments are going through and something is happening. Is it, you know, the new update to the work instruction, or maybe there's someone new on the line, and you're kind of like diagnosing those as they come, and you obviously can't predict it. It just happens. And all of us have instruments that we're a little more acquainted with. And so depending on what, you know, your luck of the draw is that day, if it happens to be on the instrument you're sort of work on, then you kind of have to manage it. And like also if it's a project that's more design based, maybe I would handle it, and the electrical might take a PCBA, printed circuit board assembly task. So there's those things which are unpredictable and they're happening every day, but you just wouldn't be able to say it's typical and that we know it's coming. We just don't know the type of thing that we'll be working on. And then otherwise, yeah, otherwise it's, you know, new products coming on market, or updates to products and things like that. So that's something that, you know, you can kind of a little more predict how that's gonna roll out. Or if we've had some acquisitions in previous years, so it's getting to know what that technology is and how that fits in with our group and bringing them up to the same programs and processes that we use so that we're all aligned, since if we are acquiring them, then that group is now Luminex too. And so there are some components that are a little more to the day-to-day, but I would say in a general sense, I'm probably, you know, if I'm working on a design transfer, I might be on the factory floor all day, doing trainings or just setting up lines, or I might be on other days at my desk all day, just like going through CAD software, just checking drawings or writing up a report or processes or writing a risk analysis. So it's a little bit of back and forth, yeah.
So you can anticipate certain activities, but then there's a lot that is off the cuff.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Would you say that somebody who enjoys variety in their day is more of a fit in this industry than somebody who prefers things to be really predictable?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely a component of just like being flexible and being willing to just kind of, if you were working on something, you might get pulled to have to work on something else, and then just being okay with that. And
Yeah.
I kind of find it exciting, but maybe someone who's more of like a wants to see things through, although to be honest, in engineering there's really not, you're always going to have findings, so there's not too much where it's like, oh, I'm just going to carry this out through the end and it's going to be nice and neat. You always have to have a little level of flexibility, but yeah.
Cool. Okay, so what did you do before you started Luminex? I know that you mentioned that a little bit before. You came from
so maybe if I can walk back up to Luminex. Like I mentioned, I grew up outside of Philly, went to Penn State where I studied mechanical engineering, and I worked in a lab there. And so worked in a lab for the Underseas Weapons Office, working on defensive torpedoes. So it was basically torpedoes that would attack incoming torpedoes.
Oh.
And in that group, they had an opening for a research position. And so they basically came up to me when I was going into my senior year and said, if you get a research position here, you come on as a research assistant, we pay for your master's, and then you get a stipend. And so I was kind of like, all right, might as well, like I was enjoying my engineering school. So I was like, might as well stay for 2 more years and then do research and then also, you know, be a grad student. And so I did that, and then I switched my research project, which was one in the same lab, but then it worked more on characterizing voice disorders. And so I did an experimental model of the human vocal tracts. And
was
then
that
after
a physical model or
yeah, it was a physical model that they were using to validate the computational models. So
okay.
it was, yeah, this is like a really difficult area. Well, humans' bodies in general are really difficult to characterize, but access to the voice tract is really difficult in humans. So they needed a physical model to just to compare early studies of a computational model. And then it was from an acoustics perspective. The lab I worked in was specialized in acoustics. So so then after that, I got a position with 3M, working in their energy and electronics group. And that job was managing capital assets. So basically equipment. In some cases it wasn't equipment, but in most companies, capital assets, most manufacturing companies, capital assets are equipment. So it was basically I supported multiple manufacturing sites throughout the United States. And then if they needed any large scale equipment installations, I would work with their teams to coordinate that and then go out there for the installations.
So that is more of the operational kind of high level project management stuff that sort of like those supplier people are working on. Not exactly the same position, but the same skill set sort of.
Yeah, it definitely was more coordination. And I think, but at the same time, there was a lot that you would have to consider, like, especially if we were getting sensitive equipment, you know, everything down to the packaging, to the type of truck that was moving it, to the rigging, to the electrical requirements. Some of the sensitive equipment that we were using was for optics, for analysis and inspection. And so setting up a clean room environment, making sure that the air handling systems could handle that. And so it would kind of just like have all of these sprouts that would start sticking out, because you would make sure that the air handling system could accommodate that. But then suddenly you were like, can the roof accommodate that air handling system? And so it was sort of like the process engineers at those sites couldn't dig into those details. And so where I was in division engineering, that was sort of our responsibilities to handle all those details and then also assist with the actual installation and then acceptance of those equipment.
That's a really good experience to hear about, because I think a lot of students think an engineer is going to be designing a particular device and that's all they're going to do. And I think there's a lot more support roles in the engineering industry. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's for sure a balance. In fact, I would say the majority, I moved in more of a technical role when I got back into Luminex, especially in R&D, and then in manufacturing, it's quite technical too. But I would say the majority of people I graduated aren't really in technical roles. And sometimes you hear that where people will say, you know, it was a good springboard, but I'm not necessarily using what I learned in college, or maybe just having the knowledge of it. You know, I always say engineering teaches you how to be a problem solver. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do problem solving in an engineering related field, because sometimes you can apply it to other places. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think in those positions where you're organizing logistics and stuff, you mentioned having to consider a ton of inputs and different factors, and you wouldn't really be able to do that without a lot of critical thinking and problem solving skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the skills that students are learning in engineering classes in high school and in college are equipping them for practically any high level thinking position. So that's good. It's good to hear that you had that kind of experience. After that, you went straight to Luminex?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And you did R&D for a little bit. Now you're doing this design transfer process.
Yep.
So the next question is, how did you decide to become a senior design transfer process engineer?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was working in the R&D group and I was having a lot of fun there. It's really cool working on the front end of things, but I just kind of wanted to experience in a different group. They had an opening. I just had a conversation with the manager or my current manager, who was also in R&D, and just kind of just seeing what it was like. And so that was really just trying to round out my expertise in a sense, and get an understanding of like a different side of things. And I also knew that they needed some more design experience as well. So I thought it would be a good fit.
So I'm still unclear a little bit about the actual group that you're in, the title of your design. Is it design transfer is one thing, and then process engineer is another thing?
Yeah, so I think in many many organizations, and it depends on the size of the organization, but they would probably say it's a manufacturing engineer. And that can be, you know, depending on what industry you're in, that can mean so much. And so this is the part where, you know, if you want to break it down, it starts to get a little cloudy, because some businesses might be like, you're an engineer, you need to do what's like Lean Six Sigma or more process engineering, where you're just like really focused on making sure that we're running like as efficiently as possible and things like that. What we're doing is we are a little bit where we're design transfer, meaning you're taking the designs that are coming up through product development, through R&D, and then bringing it and then ramping it to be a large scale and going through all those steps. And there's a lot, especially because we have you know, multiple like ISO, FDA, all those things we have to take into consideration. But then also, what's that? It's just like a organization that does like for factories. I forget exactly what it stands for. I should know that, but I'm blanking right now. But it's just like another level of standards for like most places that you go, they would be like ISO certified, for example. And so you have to maintain that every year. And so there's just different levels of, not just for our own design project process as a company, but then there's like external things that we have to document along the way based off of the area that we're in.
Okay, so yeah, there's with that ISO thing, that sounds like standards that you have to make sure that the manufacturing process is abiding by, right? Is there any regulatory aspect that goes into?
Yeah, so that's FDA regulatory is a big thing for the type of work that we do. That part of that is like REACH and BROHAS compliance with all the materials that we get. We can't just get a part that, you know, and from Home Depot and put it in. Like, I mean, we might, depending on whether or not we could get that certification, probably not. But that's when we work with like the supply group to make sure that these parts that we're getting in are kind of checking the boxes. And then likewise for the facilities, when we're setting them up, that they're meeting all of the other standards. And so that's something, since I've been in the group for just a year, I'm still catching up on, because there's a lot. But then, yeah, like within our own group, we have like different layers of, or like within the company, there's just different guidelines that we have to take as we move through the prototype phase and into the market release phase.
I'm seeing that a lot of these threads go hand in hand. You know, some people are having to talk to a lot of outside firms and companies, and then different people in different groups are also having to talk to them and make sure that they're compliant with blah, blah, blah. And then you are having to talk to all of those people. I'm not sure if you talk to a lot of the outside people, but basically what I'm getting at is there's a lot of communication going on within and out of the company, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things that we can struggle with, especially like technically minded people can sometimes be really good at, you know, having a problem come across, but then explaining it or transferring that information. I don't know, I mean, it is sort of what, maybe it's the emphasis on one versus the other, or it's just I don't know, a combination of how people process things. But yeah, that can for sure be a challenge.
How would you say you go about overcoming communication challenges? Sorry, put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I did actually take a communication course for engineers, and that was more for like a public speaking standpoint of how to present data. It was one of the first ones that was available when I was at Penn State. And I think that one of the instructors now like does that full time. She's Melissa Marshall. She's a communications instructor, and that's kind of what she does now, is like helping scientists and engineers like share their data. And that's something that kind of stuck with me, is like, you know, it's only as effective as like making sure everyone understands. The other thing I do is I try to just like always share as much as possible, like, and just keep like, okay, here's where I'm at. Like, I'm going to incorporate everybody who's on this, whether it's people who are planning, you know, we've got a planning stock room, the suppliers, things like that, just kind of letting everyone know along the way, like, we ran into this issue, you might be seeing this down the road. I just want to give you a heads up that this could be coming. So.
Well, talking to you for 30 minutes, I can tell you're an effective communicator already.
Thanks.
Yeah, good job on that. So what level of education or training is needed to work for Luminex?
Yeah, so it depends. One of the things I always, and I think it's starting to regain traction, is the idea of like going to like a vocational or technical high school, because then that is an option for somebody. I mean, it's a great option if you know, wanted to be a technician. I mean, we have a lot of people who are working on our instruments who might have that experience, and then it doesn't require, you know, a 4-year. So there's that aspect of it. And then of course, I think there's also people who might just have experience. Likewise, technicians who would be focused on inspections or, you know, machine shop. So that might not necessarily require, or doesn't require 4 years, but it would be more of specific focused training. And so that's like a really good option, especially for someone who might be like, I don't know if I want to take all those calculus and physics courses, but I still have this really technical bent.
Yeah.
So I always want to like make sure I bring that up, because the weed out courses in engineering, it's a real thing. And so definitely if people have that inclination, they could consider that as an option. For the engineering roles, there is a requirement for, for your degree at an engineering accredited college, like a certain accreditation. And then for the other supporting roles, I'm not too familiar with what those require. Yeah, but definitely I have a master's, like I mentioned, because that opportunity came up. For R&D roles, if you're looking to do more product development or development, that is something that's a plus. It's not required, but it does kind of give you a leg up. And then in my current group, there are some people who have master's degrees in engineering as well.
Do you think that those R&D positions are, I mentioned earlier that a lot of students think, consider that to be, what engineering is. Do you think those are really coveted positions and harder to get into?
This is such an engineering answer, but it depends. I think that the amount of where you're interested in, and the amount of like true new product design. I mean, if you look at a company who's making things like Apple, right? Like they're constantly creating new stuff, and like most companies are. So if you're interested in a certain thing that you want to work on, yes. And then especially in the Austin area, there's a lot of opportunities for software engineers working on new, like non-physical tech products. But it can be sometimes, I think sometimes, especially those design roles aren't as common in my experience as manufacturing roles, just because of the number of people that manufacturing requires. And like I said, you might have like I just bought like a DeWalt drill, and I know an engineer who works there, and I was just thinking to myself, like, wow, like, how often are these, like, and this is just thinking out loud, I'm like, how often is this changing? Like, for sure it's changing. Maybe this isn't a great example, but we're in a space where things are kind of changing, and some manufacturing could support. Like when I was at 3M, they had some electrical, like service equipment for utility lines that they put those in, and those are supposed to last for 20 years. So it's like they just don't change the designs on those very frequently, but they still need to manufacture them. So yeah. I don't know the specifics of the ratios though.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for clarifying that. It seems like in certain industries, particularly these manufacturing ones, like you said, outside of software, you're going to have to be doing a lot of work outside of just the design. But then maybe in software and some of those other fields where you don't have to physically create things, you don't need all those support roles. So I'm sure the other support roles will look like testing and DevOps and those kinds of things. So
yeah, and that's kind of what we do too. We also do testing, and so we kind of have like, we're sort of like an umbrella for what if you went to like a larger company, say like, like 3M or Boeing, or like they might have specific groups that do sustaining or testing or new product integration. Like they might be broken up into multiple different groups at their company.
Excuse me. Do you think that most of the time a big company like that would have all those groups chunked together for one particular product line, and then have the same kind of groups chunked together for a different product? Basically like different companies that make, one particular thing all under the same umbrella of GM, because GM is huge, right?
Yeah, GM and all those ones. I think definitely it's separated by their product offerings. Like when I was at 3M, it was energy and electronics, but then they had healthcare, then they had consumer markets, and so you had similar roles that probably all reported upwards in a similar fashion, but we're working on different different products and different project lines. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Sorry, I said GM. I meant to say 3M.
No, but it's the same for GM too. They're also huge. So it's,
Right.
you know, if you think of GM, and they've probably got like multiple vehicles that,
Yeah.
you know, don't necessarily intersect, even though it's the same industry.
Yeah, totally. Cool. What's next? A level of education. What academic and technical skills are required to work for Illuminex?
Yeah, so I think, gosh, technical skills on there, they're certainly looking for, you know, problem solving in the sense of like, yeah, like you mentioned, critical thinking, but in the sense of like, if it's a mechanical role, they might want somebody who has design, GD&T, familiarity. We use SolidWorks as our CAD system, but some sort of CAD modeling. And then I think probably experience with, you know, working with vendors and machine shops and that type of element, whereas from electrical, I know they have their own design package that they use, and things that would support that. And then I think probably also too, just a kind of independence as well, where you can sort of just take a look and do like your own testing and have comfort level with using whatever physical tools you need or programs that you need for carrying that out, whether it's like I mean, I don't use it as much anymore, but I have used like MATLAB or statistics software, or even just measuring devices. You know, I'm comfortable with like, you know, temperature measuring devices, pressure devices, working with environmental chambers, things like that. Just I mean, this is like a pretty wide breadth. Most places it would be a lot more specific, but experience in any of those, and then working with machine parts, plastic parts as well.
How much of your work is necessary to have a background in, and how much do you learn on the job?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably, I mean, I'm at the senior level, so I think there is an expectation that you come in with like a certain amount of like understanding and independence, that you can kind of just jump in and be able to, you know, learn pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine at an entry level that it's going to be a lot more where you're learning as you come in, but you're able to use that problem solving that you built throughout the engineering degree to initially apply that. I had interns in R&D who weren't even done college, but were still able, within the course of like a couple of months in the summer, take on design tasks and pick it up pretty quickly because they're already in that mode. And so they're starting to get that understanding of how to approach things from design perspective.
Cool. Let's see. What should I be teaching in my classroom to prepare students for employment at a company like this?
Yeah, so I think from a technical perspective, there's different programs that you can familiarize yourself with if it's available. If someone's interested in, like, of course I'm biased for mechanical engineering, but whether or not you're going to be designing, it's helpful to have some CAD knowledge, I think. And then also just, you know, a basic level understanding of statistics and testing, and what a good sample amount is for a specific type of test, understanding, you know, from a reliability standpoint, what life cycle testing would look like. And so that's kind of a little more on the statistics side. Even just playing around with things like Raspberry Pi and Arduino, those are really great things just to be able to set up like a test example. And so if we were trying to test like a motor or something, and maybe we don't want to test it in the instrument, we could use something like that and not have to create something super complicated. Just, yeah, you know, familiarity and comfort with taking things apart, setting things up. Those are the more technical side of things. And then on the other side, you know, I heard it all the time when I was in school, but like teamwork, getting used to working in teams, like you mentioned, communicating, writing the reports with the data in it and showing your process, kind of like how you started, what the results were, what do those results tell you? Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to send off all my data. I'm just going to pull the data, put like one graph in and be like, and here's what I got from that. And that's what most people need to know. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I might have like, you know, 20 more pages of data that I just condensed, but it's kind of getting a comfort level with like, what do you need to be able to convey the purpose of your tests and stuff.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I think I will focus more on presentations, because I currently kind of do a lot of projects where students have an end product, but then I just kind of look over all of their stuff. So it would probably benefit them to condense it, like you're saying, and
yeah. Slides are used a lot. We use like slide decks for sending things back and forth, and sometimes they'll be like, oh, can you make a slide deck and then send it out? It's like, okay. I mean, it's not, I don't particularly like that, but I understand why we do it. And the thing that's great about that is if you do a good job and say you have to come back to this like a year later, you're like, oh shoot, I can pull this up. And then you're like, yes, okay, yeah, like here are the main points. And I don't have to read through and open up all my separate Excel sheets. So I try to do a good job of documenting at the end of each step. And then another thing as I'm thinking of right now too is, since in manufacturing we have to create the manufacturing instructions, is that would be a good exercise if like you guys had to make something and create instructions and then have someone else make it and be like, how clear was it? Because sometimes I'm so comfortable with something and I'm taking pictures, and then someone else who's not familiar will look at it and be like, wait a minute, is this like they're trying to understand like orientation or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, like of course this isn't clear because you've never seen it come together. And so you kind of fall into that when you get super familiar with something where it's like, okay, we have to, you know, simplify things or just add more pictures, because no matter how much you write, people are always drawn towards pictures. And so using a more visual component.
And with an example like that, you would be putting the pictures and the descriptions in the slide deck generally?
So for the instructions, we have them in a PDF, and the assemblers are to pull them up off of a system that we have. And so that way, each time they build an assembly or sub-assembly, they open it and they have it on their screen, and then they're going down as they're putting the instrument together. Yeah. Okay. But for like internally, if I'm trying to share something with someone to be like, hey, I had this finding, you know, I did this test at this pressure over this number of days, and here's the result, and here's what I, you know, propose. It's kind of like tell them where you're starting, provide the information, and then tell them, like, I always try to end it with like next steps, and like those are my recommendations. I think we should move over to this pump because, you know, XYZ, but here's another option, and then usually give two options there. Yeah. But even if it's just to say, like, I want to take this small motor that I got off and see if it's going to last in something for 5 years and then just run it continuously. They could just do something just to get an understanding of like, oh, this is what we would call reliability, or, you know, end of life, like how long is this going to take to do? And then they could wrap that up in a report, be like, oh yeah, this motor, you know, failed after 1 week of continuous testing, and this one didn't, and here's the electrical specifications that we use, things like that. You could probably do that pretty easily with some like hobby kits that you have.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I already have lots of ideas jumping off of that. How has technology affected your position? It's pretty.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge, I think one of the things that is a challenge is that some of the stuff that's available on market, especially coming from a design group where you're always wanting to improve things, is like sometimes that's too much work. Like you can't, that's a lot of work for our field service engineers to have to keep going out and changing things. It's like you have some things, like I mentioned, it's like you got when you get an appliance, you expect it to last a certain amount of years, and then there's going to be an update to it. But for our stuff, it lasts a pretty long time. And so we might say, oh man, we could change this and it would be so much easier for the assemblers, but you have to kind of temper that and be like, all right, we're only going to adjust things, or we have to put it into take these lessons learned, and as something comes over, be like, hey, what would be great in this if we can incorporate this. So there's just so much that's, and vendors who are always coming and like knocking on the door and like, hey, look, we have this valve which is now like a quarter of the size of the one you're using, and it's like, that's awesome, but like you can't just start switching things around to something that's on market. So it's sort of getting like a balance of like, okay, if there is something that needs to be replaced, like for sure you want to bring in like but it just doesn't, that's just not something that we're continuously updating in our field. Maybe fields like, something that gets replaced more frequently, like a phone, or, cars are getting updated pretty frequently. You're going to start to see more of that adaptation.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a general question. What are the positive aspects of your job?
It's definitely like I really like researching and I'm very analytically minded. So there are days where you can kind of just get like lost, just like, all right, I'm trying to fix this. And it's just like really exciting to just work on that kind of stuff and just find, one thing we always talk about is like root cause, like what's the root cause issue? And so working towards that and trying to like slowly chip away to get there. And sometimes we don't have a full answer, but that's pretty interesting, especially we're working pretty quick. So we are seeing stuff that we're working on get implemented. So that's definitely, the other side of it is like I work with some really, really smart people. So it's just like I'm learning a lot. Like I don't have a background in electrical engineering. I did take a circuits course, but now I feel like I'm very comfortable with, not very comfortable, but I have more comfort with like PCBAs and like soldering. And like, even when I go home, if something electronic breaks, I feel a little more comfortable fixing it on my own, or at least diagnosing it. So I can tell like a contractor, hey, I tried this and this. I'm pretty sure the pump is broken on my dishwasher. You know what I mean? So you start to like carry that with you outside. Yeah.
Cool. What advice would you give to a student who is interested in working in engineering or manufacturing?
Yeah, and so I saw this question. I want to like also open it up, because I think sometimes people are saying, oh yeah, I'm an engineer, or I want to be an engineer. I'm really like, I love working on cars. I love, getting my hands on things. And I would say that's awesome for you. Like take the science courses, take the math courses. Those are going to help you in college. Obviously, you want to be an engineer. That's great. One thing as a side note, especially for people who might be underrepresented in engineering, and so as a woman, when I was in engineering school, there's not many women there, and so but also if people maybe don't have engineers in their family, just to consider it. It doesn't necessarily mean that like because you didn't grow up working on cars, you have like you won't be able to enter this field. If you enjoy solving problems, like when I was little, I loved like arts and crafts, and that's tinkering. Like we might not consider that as like the same as like helping someone work on a car, but like some of that stuff has given me such an attention to detail that like it really does help when I'm doing these like really small assemblies and things. And so for people who might say, I don't know about engineering, it's like, all right, well, do you like solving problems? Like what are some problems in the world right now? It's like, I always ask younger students that, and they always say global warming. Yes, right now it's COVID. There's different things, if you like animals, it's like, hey, like 3M had a vet tech, whole group of technologies there. So definitely to consider that as well. For people who might think to themselves, like, I don't know if I want to be an engineer, but, maybe they have a type of hands-on inclination, and they also have that kind of like critical thinking, problem solving aspect of it, that also is an engineering benefit as well.
Awesome. What would you recommend teachers do to strengthen the relevance of school to the workplace?
Yeah, I think it would, I think one of the things is like, and I understand that, it has to be that way, is like the emphasis on grades. And I was definitely like a diligent student. And so I was always like, I want to get these really great grades. But when I got to college, it's like, I'm in, I'm sure the same as at like UT or school tier. You're in a course with like 400 people and you're getting graded on a, bubble things. And it's like, sometimes, especially preparing seniors who are going into engineering, you're going to hit a breaking point, and that's okay, and just find your support system. But so there's that aspect, as like preparing students who are going into engineering school, like especially students that might be at a higher level of experiencing imposter syndrome, like I mentioned, underrepresented groups, whether it's because they might be Black or Latino or women or both, like they might start to see, oh, I don't look like these people in these classrooms. So there's that aspect of it. And then just from a more technical standpoint, just, taking the math and science courses, even if they might not get the A if they take the AP course, like encouraging them to do that, because you're in engineering school, myself and many people failed like multiple tests, and just getting that comfort level, because a lot of these students are so used to being like the top, and it's like, it's okay if, the point of these courses, I mean, is that they're difficult, and encouraging people to take them regardless, and to not be like, oh, I failed this test. It's like, well, let's look at what you didn't understand here. Let's take the grade away for a second. And I think a lot of teachers are starting to like go that way. And I definitely had teachers who were like that too.
I think so too. Because in your job, you encounter difficult problems where there's not one good solution. And you encounter scenarios where you don't know things, right? And you're not always in a situation where things are cut and dry and you're making an A on everything. You have to you have to dig deep and fail sometimes, and work around that, and recover and get better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, I'm saying it is, I think it is a technical component too, because this is the nature of what we're doing, is that a lot of what we're doing is like very, very like complicated, intricate problems. And so if you're not like, it's not always going to go according to plan. And so if you are buckling that much when you're failing like a test, it's just okay to get comfortable there, and to not be like, this is the end all be all. In a way, it's like sometimes you want to see when things fail, because that also gives us information, like, oh, this motor failed at this point in time, and so then it's like, that's important to know that. So there's definitely different ways to look at it, but some of the things that's really helpful is identifying like concepts that we might need to strengthen, or team up with somebody who has that expertise, and then you might bring another area of expertise. So
That's awesome. So thank you for sharing everything. It sounds like there's a lot of different skills that go into it, a lot of different people, a lot of different connections, a lot of different tasks in different fields and positions in engineering that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. So I think all of your experiences and expertise and knowledge at this point, it should be very, very helpful to people who listen to this interview and even just the stuff that I've learned, taking that back to my classroom. I think it'll help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad it was useful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I love that conversation. I know I was taking it all in, and thank you so much, Liz, for your insight. I particularly love the last part. I work in schools, right? And I talk to students about the jobs that, you know, they want, and sometimes it's jobs like yours. And I tell them, don't be discouraged, because the fact is that a lot of them don't come from backgrounds with family, like you said, that have that role model in their lives yet. So it's so crucial to understand that. And anyone that watches this, it's important for them to really hear that out, that you know, it's okay to fail, and it's really important that you put yourself in where you want to be, no matter where you come from. So thank you for that insight. It was really nice. Well, thank you so much to both of you, Bailey and Liz, for joining us today and discussing career pathways in the manufacturing industry. I truly appreciate the time you put aside for us to share this, and really appreciate those that are watching this video today. So if you would like, and you like the content, please give the thumbs up on our channel, and you can also subscribe for us to get alerts to you on more future content for us. So with that, I'm gonna let you all go. Please stay safe and healthy, and have a great day, everyone. Take care.
All right, thank you.
Bye.